Hello and welcome back, and that is right. Today we want to talk about a brand new desktop Synology NAS. How long's it been since I've said that? 2024 was a drought when it came to Synology desktop, tower style hardware, focusing a lot more the brand was towards enterprise, towards Rackman. Although we saw some dribs and drabs there at the B station, things were pretty quiet. Now in 2025, we are hearing more and more about a new series of desktop solutions from Synology across different portfolios. But the very first one is this: adding to the Active Protect and the DP7400 that was initially revealed in summer 2024, they have branched that new series out into some desktop node devices like this one. This is the DP3200. There's also the DP3400 as well, a 2-bay and a 4-bay NAS. But before we go any further, we have really got to point our finger and have a big go at the elephant in the room, because this ain't like the other Synology NASs. This is not like the very, very similar hardware DS723 Plus or indeed the DS923 Plus. Neither one of these new 2 and 4 bays released in January 2025 are going to run DSM. They're not designed for DSM. They are designed for one appliance, and that is Active Protect. Active Protect is a dedicated backup for business platform, and frankly, it's not going to be for everyone. Indeed, I think there's a lot of long-time Synology users that are not going to be a fan of where it seems Synology is going with this, and bring into question how much this is going to draw away from DSM development, how much it's going to draw away from Synology's attention on DSM, but more on that later. The DP320 is heavily stylized, as mentioned, on both the look and the architecture of the Synology DS723 Plus, released at the very beginning of 2023. Now, that means it's got that dual-core 4-thread AMD processor, the embedded Ryzen, and that also allows no integrated graphics there on board, but a priority towards file processing. It also has 8 gig of ECC memory that, from what I can see, cannot be officially upgraded. At the moment, this is available in one configuration and one configuration only. And what is that configuration? Well, there is a lack of M.2 NVMe's on the bot. They've removed that from the system, even though M.2 NVMe slots were on the DS723. Also, the system lacks the 10 GBE upgrade, only arriving with 2 1 gig Ethernet ports that I know if you're about to go to the comments and get angry about the 1 GBE, what I'm going to do is give you 1 second pause so you can do it. Welcome back. And it doesn't have an eSATA upgrade port there either. There is no expandability with the DX517 or the DX intended 525 coming out later this year, I believe. So scalability wise versus the DS723 Plus, it is a poor showing. But as mentioned, we've got to divorce ourselves from comparing this, at least on a software level and utility level, than that of the DS723. We're allowed to make comparisons to the price, don't worry, we'll get on that. But in terms of hardware capability, this is a different device. Now, a lot of that logic extends to the 4-bay model. Again, same CPU as the 923, the lack of 10 GBE scalability, the lack of eSATA expandability, but at the very least, that system does have the M.2 NVMe slots on side, and it arrives with 16 gig of ECC memory as well. Talking briefly about ports and connections, there is those 2 1 gigabit Ethernet ports now. One is dedicated towards backup data transfer, and the other one is dedicated to management. And again, within the GUI, you can see that control played out. But as you can see, there is no USB. We already talked about the lack of 10 GBE, the lack of eSATA expandability, but there's no USBs there. And the one USB was mounted there on the front, a standard USB 5 gig connection. And right now, the scope from within Active Protect for that USB is pretty darn limited. Now, even when I went in to the more DSM stylized dashboard, again, hopefully that's located later in this video, we'll cover that, there wasn't still any kind of storage capabilities for that USB to create a local USB backup. I could create a remote backup, and the software services towards Synology C2 were there, but this USB connectivity was virtually nil for utilization. I would have liked to have seen more, particularly if they're going to go to the trouble of removing a bunch of ports but leave that USB. That just opens the door to me to just let me use it then. But this brings us to the next architectural difference between the traditional Synology NASes we've known up to this point and the DP series, and that is that this arrives pre-populated. This system arrives with two 8 gig 8AT 3310 enterprise hard drives there inside 8 TB, and the system by default is a RAID 1 mirror internally. It's a RAID 5 on the 4-bay device, and again, that is with 8 TB drives inside, so you're looking at 24 TB on the 4-bay and 8 TB on the 2-bay. Now, you can't use other drives, but I would argue slightly more annoyingly than that, and I know that's already going to annoy some of you, that is that this is the only storage configuration at launch. They're not launching it in an 8 and a 16 and whatever. It's only available in the 2-bay with 2 8TBs and the 4-bay with 4 8TBs. No other storage configurations. You can't even configure the M.2 NVMe's on the 4-bay device. The majority of the setup, the majority of the storage configurations are default, much like we saw in the B Station series when the system image was tailored a lot more towards their drives by default. This is very much the same case. So up to this point, I think it would be fair to say that on a hardware level and indeed on a value level, there's a lot of long-time Synology users and system admins that work with them and other brands that are probably questioning what this device is about. And of course, that is going to be about the software. This is, if you thought DSM was a software upfront product more than the hardware, this takes that logic to 11 because it's Active Protect on this that Synology want to sell this device on. So let's move away from talking about the hardware and get our hands dirty with the software. So there we go. Here is the Active Protect Manager GUI. Here I'm accessing this local on the local area network there. And if I do open up Synology's assistant there, you can see we've got two different IPs here for each of those physical ports. One of them is a management port and the other one is the file transfer port. And this is pretty much what you see here. Now, just to give you a bit of perspective, that is DSM. Again, this is when you're looking at that more desktop responsive appliance there, whereas this is a singular application. Of course, we are going to be drawing comparison later on against the popular application Active Backup for Business, but we'll come back to that later on. It's also worth remembering there is a secondary GUI based in here. So, for example, if you go into the Site Manager there is an additional viewpoint that you can take here on this appliance, and this is a secondary viewpoint here, which I'm not convinced is still going to be here the whole time. It wouldn't surprise me if Synology retire this GUI for the sake of simplicity, but there is a secondary GUI for the DS320 and the DS420 340 appliance there, and it's more like a streamlined version of DSM running there in the background. You've got the usual windows that you've seen before there. Again, they are streamlined variations of the original control panel in DSM. Lots of the options aren't there. The same goes there at the top with the personal information. I couldn't find an option, weirdly, for two-factor authentication. I found that super weird for Synology services. We'll come back to that later on. Active Protect Manager, I will say the GUI they've gone for here is pretty smooth. If we have a little look, we've got a little bit of one panel information here for everything to learn about this. So, for example, I've got one process here that's got a warning. We'll come back to that later on. 5 successful backups from different devices, file servers, some OSs there. And, of course, we've got the ability for virtual appliances there and some of those SaaS services like Microsoft 365. I didn't find Google Workspace, weirdly, but I'm sure that is one that will get added later as it is still currently an option on the Active Backup there for Google Workspace. So I was kind of surprised it isn't currently available in Active Protect. Now, when you look at the different machines that you've got listed here, you're able to get some real-time information about the individual backups. I've got multiple NAS devices here running backups. We've got the two different OS. One of the ones is the one I'm on right now. On the right-hand side, giving real-time information about the successful backups there and some of those warnings as mentioned earlier on. So, for example, if we look at this one up here, we can see real-time information about the backup process, what exactly is being backed up, the nature of what's going on. We've then got the versions of the backup, and we've got that first initial larger backup there at 71 gigabyte from some files from before that I've done a manual lock on. I've locked this one so it can't be overwritten, it can't be removed, and incremental changes over time with each individual backup that have happened. And again, you can go to a recovery portal at any time, and this is subject to the user account you choose to use. And from there, for example, these are directories that I backed up on a remote NAS. We can go back to the original one there, go to one of these folders that's got data inside, one of these other ones inside. That was a Unify NAS that I backed up from. But from that, if we choose to, we can go all the way to the most recent one, and any file changes that have happened, we can access. I will say there is no thumbnails, nothing like that. You've got to think of this more in the same context that you'd look at snapshots. And you can recover, for example, right-clicking individual files. You can download that local file. Recovering a full image is not possible on file folder level backups for file servers there. So, for example, when we're looking at all of these options here on this list, we can open the recovery portal, but we can't download it from here without going into that window. And again, you can't restore the entire image. That's something that is reserved for image level backups. And again, so for example, if we look at my laptop here, this is the one that's going for a no loss backup. That is using Worm there in the background. From there, we can go to the versions, see that history of the backups. There's the initial one, a 3.6 TB, and further ones moving along. And if we choose to, we can then open up the recovery portal, and from there, restore that system level image if we choose to quite easily. You do have to utilize the local tools for rebooting an entire machine, as you can see there. And if you go for restoring the whole machine, you have to download the media creator tool and then have to recover from a cold boot. But it is indeed possible on an OS level, just not possible on those file server levels there. I kind of get it, but not really. I've got one gripe as well. When it comes to backing up an entire OS, you don't really have any modular choice. So, for example, on this PC, I have two distinct drives here. I've got a connected phone, we can ignore that, but I've got my main OS drive and I've got an 8 TB local backup drive there. I wasn't able to select either or both. It just by default, I downloaded the client. There is a client for Active Protect here that synchronizes on your system and runs those backups from your client device, also factoring in deduplication. There's some space saving methods, other stuff, but I wasn't able to make it modular. The settings options didn't give me the option to select to not have, for example, bulkier connected drives when what I probably only wanted to back up was the operating system. Now, backup operations break down, as mentioned earlier on, into OS level backups, where you can connect to a Mac, Windows, or Linux system and back up via the OS, Ubuntu, and stuff like that. And again, you install that tool as mentioned. Physical servers that you can choose to access utilizing the downloadable client. Again, some of this can extend to Windows clients as well, and you have to take advantage of a passkey that you use within the agent that you download onto the machine to connect them together. Then you've got file servers, that is your standard NAS stuff. And again, adding these is a great deal more straightforward and relatable. Again, they can break down into some of those kind of unified storage areas or just another Synology NAS if you choose to. That does simplify it, but there isn't currently a client to synchronize your Synology NAS with the Active Protect service. I'm kind of surprised by that because I think a lot of Synology users might consider a simplified backup device like this if they already have DSM systems in the field and they just want to point their device at it. Of course, they might argue you've already got that option with Active Backup for Business Agent and Active Backup for Business. So I'm just going to install that in the background, but I'm kind of surprised that isn't an easier managed option. If you are running VMware, Hyper-V, stuff like that, you can go ahead and add those hypervisors to your system. Again, you will need a lot of those credentials to enter those in, but you can synchronize those and they'll start syncing to bare metal on the server when you need them. It's also worth highlighting that when you do that, particularly with the virtual machines, you can mount those as a virtual machine if you choose to. It will be significantly based on the hardware at your disposal and the virtual machine in question, but you can mount these if need be as a failover, whether it is that the virtual machine is inaccessible or corrupted. The idea that you can mount a virtual machine onto a locally deployed hypervisor is appealing. But again, this is something we can already do on Active Backup. One integration that I saw between Active Backup and DSM is the fact that on DSM, what you can do if you already have active appliances on Active Backup for Business running some of those tasks and you want to migrate them over to your new platform, apparently it's very, very straightforward. You open up your Active Backup, make sure you're using the latest version. I'm running a beta of Active Backup that supports this 3.0.0 there, and this one allows you adding this option down here at the bottom to connect this Synology NAS with an Active Protect site site, and then from there, the Active Protect system will handle all of those backup tasks for you. That does mean, by the looks of things, that you'll no longer be able to manage and view these tasks within Active Backup for Business on DSM. I've got mixed feelings about that. I'm not sure whether that is something you're going to be able to reverse afterwards, and there is question marks around needing enough licenses on your Active Protect site to do that. But there is at the very least a convenient operational handover. But again, who's going to use that and to what extent? I'll be interested to see who walks away from Active Backup and on to Active Protect so readily. And likewise, there is an Active Protect Vault as well that allows you to target the Active Protect system onto the standard NAS appliance you've got here. But what these Active Protect Vault images are protected write once read mini images. Unfortunately, this is a NAS that I've been utilizing for some performance testing in another video. And sadly, this is a system, because I was going for premium performance, I ran it on ext4 rather than BTRFS, and a standard RAID 5 as well, rather than SHR. The result was the NAS that I had running here, unfortunately, is not running BTRFS. Consequently, I'm not able to create that write once vault, but at the very least, there is a kind of secondary direction where your Active Protect network of devices, your clusters, can migrate and send over an Active Protect encrypted vault file there, which again, you have to make sure you've enabled write once read many on DSM to stop it, potentially being corrupted as an offsite backup there, but still, the fact you're locked in to BTRFS volumes rather than ext4, I'm kind of surprised a little bit about. And finally, after virtual machines, we can look at cloud appliances here. As mentioned, I'm kind of surprised they haven't got Google Workspace currently on here. I'm sure that's something they're going to add later on. But right now, it is merely the Microsoft 365 software as a service platform that you can integrate with. Again, that does extend to a few other different appliances, a few other different platforms there, but it does cover the gamut there. But still, currently at launch, it does look like there's still a little bit more coverage of what you can do in Active Backup. I do wonder long term about that, but at the very least, you've still got a little bit more flexibility currently on that platform. And again, because they've got those different apps and services for those different SaaS platforms, it still makes it a more desirable platform currently. Now, I'm pretty sure I touched on this in the introduction, but just in case I haven't touched on it, it's worth remembering that the DP320, unlike the large-scale rack mount, DP7400 does have certain limitations with regards to acting as a clustering overseer, kind of overarching device, or a node, with the DP320 and the DP340 as node only. So, for example, if you want to add backup servers to this Active Protect site, it won't let you, because this appliance doesn't allow you to do that. It won't let this system be the overarching power device there, the one that's doing all the controlling. But if you want to add it to an existing Active Protect site where the management server is that rack mount, then it'll let you do it. You just have to go ahead, get the credentials from your main DP7400 system, add them in there, and then this node, this DP3200, will work fine. Again, I don't know whether that's Synology trying to create a ladder subscription system where you would use this device and eventually graduate up rather than letting people stay on this one system too long. I know they are scaling the licenses on these smaller devices slightly differently to the larger scale devices with regards to number of deployed systems and how this can be accessed externally rather than just on the internal network. But still, nonetheless, that does lead to a little bit of confusion, I think, in the presentation of this desktop. There is also the means to add Synology's own C2 platform as well to act as remote storage. And when it comes to those hypervisors, as mentioned earlier on, you've got a few decent little spectrum of popular VM enterprise-grade platforms for you to utilize there within Hyper-V and VMware. I don't know how much that's going to scale out to custom VM deployment or, slightly more hinky VM hypervisors out there, but at least now down to business level stuff, unsurprisingly there. Now, if we go back down to the site manager there and just dig in a little bit more into this particular site. This is managing not only this server, but the rest of the site it's in conjunction with. We're going to take a look at what we like and what we don't like. There's a bit more real-time information there. Again, there's information there with regards to the data reduction, but you can't dig especially deep into the reduction. What I mean by that, if you go into the storage area here, You're able to see those two 8 TB drives there on the system, and if you want, you can see the total storage that has been occupied there. But it keeps talking about the space saving that has been made by this appliance. It's mentioning up here the duplication ratio up here. There's nothing to click. It's telling me I've saved 30% of my data. But it doesn't let me find out where that saving is. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, take, for example, this PC backup here. This PC backup, we go to the versions. As mentioned, the initial backup there is 3.6 TB with a few cumulative smaller ones. That was one I cancelled when I left the office. That have added the extra data that I've created that, over the course of those last few hours. However, I don't know whether it's counting these as the reduction because I've not backed up similar appliances. I haven't backed up, for example, 4 identical servers and 2 identical systems here. I'm not backing those up. So I'm curious where the carryover is. That save might well be this on this second VM here, which is 902, that there is some similarities in file carryover there. If I go to the recovery portal there, I'll be able to break down in the files there. And again, it's a Windows system there, so maybe some of that saving is there. But I don't like that it's telling me I've made these great savings, but then not really articulating that for me to let me know. Now, again, there is the argument Synology are trying to keep it simple. Maybe you don't want to know how exactly I've saved data by 1.4 TB, but that's quite a substantial saving there. And I don't think that's just some of my general files there. So I'd be interested if Synology ever go down the road of adding just where that discount is in terms of space saving. They don't have to, but I think it will be nice and convenient to see. Now, when it comes to the formulation of your backup routines, that's something Active Protect, I would argue, does damn well. I would argue it's the nicest wizard I've ever utilized in terms of creating a backup routine. For example, these are 4 individual backup routines. I'm going to create a brand new one live in front of you. This is going to be for a physical machine rather than for SAS services. I'm going to go for an immutable protection plan. That means that once the data is created, it can't be deleted or modified in its original form for a retented period. So we'll go for it there. So from there, I'll give it a name. I'll call this one Save 1. Again, we're just going to call this Immune. From there, we can say that it's going to be run by the system's time, or you can go for the object it's connecting to. So which system is going to be managing the action of the actioning of the schedule. For example, we'll keep these versions, I'm going to say, for 10 days. From there, we then say we want it to be an automatic backup every single hour, and that's starting from 2 in the morning there. Again, you can choose times that you may or may not want it to run. You can also create a defined schedule of when you want it to run, and it will let you know based on the different kinds of system, some preset defaults that you can adapt, which is pretty nice in terms of choosing one that you want to use. So, for example, a file server, then click Next. From there, you can choose whether you want it to push the system to do certain things or behave in certain ways. So as you can see, you can really push it quite substantially in terms of whether you're using a physical machine or running some of those database level stuff there. Again, press forward. I'm going to have to remove that credential option. And from that, then you've got different advanced settings there and how you want this one routine you're creating to adapt to different client devices. So, for example, how this one backup routine plan that I'm creating behaves with a VM, a physical server, or a Windows OS system. Mac isn't listed there. It's quite nice to know this one backup routine will be able to behave different depending on the variation of OS that it is running from. The same goes with the backup copy there, whether you want to send it to a backup destination you've connected the system to. So if you created remote storage, for in my case I've gone with a C2, you can add to this backup routine the option to add it to your cloud space as well. And it's that straightforward. There is your summary. You can adapt and amend some of those. And there you go. I've created my plan there. And then later on, if I add a new server system, so for example, if I want to add a brand new server to my backup routines, we'll go for a physical server, for example. Actually, no, we'll go for a file server. If I want to add a brand new file server, I can choose one of my new routines that I've just created there. But it doesn't stop there, because when you do go back to those protection plans that you create one by one, let's say, for example, this one is no longer suitable. If I choose to, not only can I duplicate it and modify it into a new version if I want, but I can also also archive these as well. And archiving a routine allows you to maintain and keep the rules of the backup that you're going to use. So, for example, file server here, I can choose to right-click and archive this particular backup. This one, for example, has been slightly slow in what I've been doing because I've been oversaturating my own network. I can choose to archive this backup, and now for that system, I can bring that back if I choose to. So it's nice that I don't necessarily have to delete an existing backup routine, nor do I have to delete protection plans that I've created just because I don't need them right now. And modifying those backup routines is also pretty darn quick as well. For example, let's go for no loss backup here. Not only can I modify pretty much every one of those settings that I've adapted up to this point when I created it, and that will impact every single one of the backup routines that I am running right now that choose to use no loss backup. So if I made amendments, it would impact these two without me having to go into them manually. But at the same time, I can go into an existing backup routine and then change which one it's using. So you have a great degree of control and amendment at your fingertips. I can choose, for example, this one. I make this one no loss plan, and bang, it's changed. It's that straightforward. So it allows you broader control of many servers with very small actions if needed. And if you're concerned about who has got the levels of control of creating backups, destroying backups, or restoring backups, the user controls are just as straightforward as they are on DSM. You go ahead, you create a new user. So we'll go for Betty. Why not? Spell Betty correctly. We can go ahead, give her a name. So we'll go for Betty at Gmail. Why not? For some reason, Betty already exists. So we're just going to go for Glenn. Give it a password. Again, I'm kind of surprised there isn't any two-factor authentication rules baked into this. I know this is a local appliance, but I'd still like to use Synology's own password, the two-factor authentication tool, or be able to take advantage of third-party two-factor authentication. But again, you choose which group you want to assign them into, or create your own brand new groups, just like you would on Synology's DSM platform. I'm going to put this person in human resources, and boom, I've created Betty here, and I can adapt just what level of control she has, and if she can, for example, amend backups, whether she can stop the backup happening in the first place, or if she can restore a backup if needed. I can change and amend a lot of their abilities on the fly as a super user admin. And as mentioned, we've got those creation rules. We can go pretty strict, but why is there no two-factor authentication here? I'm just kind of surprised. You can tailor a lot of the alerts that the system will put out with regards to what's happening with the system, whether there is a backup that has failed, what's happened if a backup didn't complete effectively, or there was a drop in performance. There's actually quite an extensive range of options here, comparable, I would say, in some cases, to the Active Insight appliance from Synology there, included with the system. Also, you can tailor the login windows there to allow you to change what the end user for their backups is seeing, whether it is the recovery portal that you can tailor to your own business needs. If you do want to restore either individual files via the restoration portal or an entire operating system. I will also highlight that you do have a control over the bandwidth utilization. And if we go into the site manager there, make our way into this system's kind of breakdown here within Active Protect Manager, not only can you assess and play around with each of those individual ports there, as well as setting limitations of bandwidth control. So you can choose, for example, in certain circumstances or to certain IPs, limitations of bandwidth. So some backup operations aren't oversaturating the network. But interestingly, if you go to the air gap option, you can set quite a lot of layers of defense, as it were, or at least layers of in-access at convenient times. So, for example, firewall settings there, that's fairly standard, allowing you to edit which IPs can and cannot access the system, whitelist, blacklist. But interestingly, thanks to the air gap and isolation settings there, you can choose that you can deny all connections to the system at certain times, so that, for example, backup operations can take place at certain times, but the backups of your business outside of hours have no means of access. Even though you leave the device physically connected, you can set that up so that people just cannot get into the system. And heading into that more DSM-like command console here. You can go to control panel, and alongside the air gap there created by scheduled in access, you can choose for a lot more of the controls there in the background. Weirdly though, if you do want to take advantage of scheduled on off, you can't control it via this command console here. You have to go back into isolation settings, click the cog, and as you can see, you can deactivate the NICs individually if you choose to via that isolation method, or once again have that scheduled on and off by the case of that air gap you've created there. So you do have an element of control with regards to how the air gap is created outside of hours, which isn't going to be for everyone, but it's still quite nice to have that option. And lastly, before we end things on the software, I will also highlight that setting a device up the first time was super quick and easy. It was comparable to that of setting up DSM, but it also included several options that I'd not seen in DSM before. So, for example, setting up the storage first time, fine. A lot of that was default, but the idea of setting up scheduled scrubbing early doors or auto RAID failover there when a new drive is installed, these are things that are generally not included during the initialization of Synology and DSM. And I think it was nice to have these factored into the beginning, because I think this is certainly a system that is designed for largely set up and forget services. You set up all your remote plans and stuff, and having all of these done early doors makes a lot of sense. I think it's probably more useful for the 4-bay device rather than the 2. But again, overall, the first time setup for it was incredibly straightforward, intuitive, and bloody easy. Nevertheless, for the single plane view of all of our backups that I do genuinely like, the ease of hand-holding with setting up individual backup operations, arguably in some platforms, they're a great deal more complex than others. I will say that the Active Protect platform right now still doesn't stand up as well to me as just utilizing DSM. And I'm not suggesting the DSM is easier, because I don't think it is. It requires a little bit more time. But DSM, whether it is that you're looking at utilizing something like Active Protect, which I would argue gives you still a little bit more right now once you factor in some of those SaaS services that we've already talked about. But on top of that, once you factor in something like Hyper Backup, which is, although working in the other direction, does provide you a number of features and facilities that are not in the DP320 and Active Protect. I know that it's not designed for that, and these are different. This is apple and oranges, but still, nonetheless, I just think DSM is still giving you more right now, and that is even without talking about the inclusion of something like Synology Drive, which then allows for those client tools on numerous operating systems in a not dissimilar way to what we're seeing in Active Protect. Active Protect is a very straightforward, easy to use appliance, and it definitely is simplifying a lot of the business backups. I'm not going to fault them there, but I just think you can spend a little bit more time and have a lot more utility at your fingertips here, utilizing Synology Drive, utilizing Hyper Backup, and of course, taking advantage of the powerhouse right now that is still Synology's Active Backup for Business. Now, for some of you, this is probably going to be a hot take, but I like the Active Protect software. I think even in its first iteration when I saw it back in summer 24, I liked what I saw. How it is deployed is where my feelings are a little bit more ambiguous, because we just can't ignore the fact that this device with Active Protect, for me, as it stands, does not give me more than a DS723 Plus with Active Backup on board, with DSM on board, with the surveillance applications, the collaboration suite, and more. This is designed to be a separate line. I get it, and I get why Synology are labeling it as such. But you, the consumer, you, the business, for that matter, have that choice to make, and you have to weigh up those two options. It is effectively Synology versus Synology, whilst DSM and Active Backup are still in the game, which is why my feelings are so ambiguous, because Synology releasing this, is that going to draw support? Is it going to draw features and long-term development on Active Backup and DSM away from non-Active Protect appliances? And that's my concern. And I don't have the answer to that. If you come to this video asking, is this going to replace the existing DiskStation series as we know it? At the moment, no, I don't think it will. I think Synology would be mad to do that. There's too many good appliances, and there's nowhere near the range needed for that. But moving forward, who knows? And I think that's an important question. Also, this device seems to me to be designed as a gateway drug towards the larger scale active protect appliances like the DP7400. Even some of the feature set of this, which turns it effectively into a node for a larger system and not allow you to just get one of these and then deploy many of these nodes at remote sites, not being supported, seems like a conscious choice when this device runs comparable software to that of the larger appliances there. Yes, the hardware scale is brought down significantly, and therefore deploying some of those VMs locally would have been quite a drain, and also storage capabilities are up for question at this scale versus a rack mount. But it's still a conscious choice there on the software by Synology to scale down on this device to create a step ladder towards the larger software platform on the rack mounts. I like this device in the same way I like Synology B-Station appliances. In of themselves, I like them. I like what they're trying to do, and I think what they're trying to do, they do well. But the minute a user knows about DSM rather than BSM, or know about DSM rather than Active Protect, they're going to find out very quickly that there are better things to do and other ways to do it, and more customization and flexibility outside of this series. But if you don't want to take the time to learn those things and you want an incredibly easy backup appliance for your business, a backup appliance for your SQL database, for your growing SAA services, for your VM services, or for simple bare metal backups in your local area environment in the easiest, most non-intrusive way for your Windows, for your Mac OSs, this is a great, easy choice that is genuinely idiot-proof in setting up within 20 minutes, and with a lot of the harder storage decisions in the background where you never need to think about them. But it is by no means a perfect solution, and it does bring for me concerns about support within DSM by Synology and those individual appliances long term that may make you have to make tough decisions. We'll have to wait and see just where Synology goes with this in a year's time, and also just what other solutions arrive with traditional DSM and indeed BSM support as 2025 continues. But let me know what you think in the comments. Don't just immediately rag on the hardware. It's really easy to do, and I've tried my damnedest not to do that in this video. But I know that's going to be a conversation we need to have, so let's talk about that. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this. There's an article linked in the description to a written review that will be updating over time, and no doubt we'll do a follow-up video on this device as the software evolves. So apart from that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.